So at this point, we're now ready to go into that second painting. So if you have not already done so, you're probably ahead of me at this point. I know Margot's already finished this second painting. I ordered photos. I guess I should have just had them printed locally because I had to wait for the photos. Anyway, that first painting, I want to put a glaze to sort of give it an even finish. And at this point, I'd be somewhat content. Actually, I'm going to go in. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm still going to pull out a little bit more variety in the greens right through that zone, so that some of them that are coming towards me would still be getting a little bit of light. But overall, we'll say that first painting you did, that first study, we're going to call that one done. And I was looking through those options you have of different photos, and there were so many I liked. So I'll show you some that if you haven't been deciding. So we have this one, and I have two different, they came out the same. I played around with Photoshop. I thought that was beautiful. I almost decided to do that one. So I don't know what people are going to work with. I particularly like this one, and in fact I ordered an enlargement. So although I'm not going to do that now, I know I'm going to work that painting. This is from a friend who's a photographer out in Colorado. So it's one of her pieces, and I don't usually work from somebody else's. I have her permission to use it, and I'm familiar enough that I thought, well, I really like that. So that probably is going to be a study that's coming. Okay, so this was the first one I laid out. So I set this sketch in, and I have this here. I've already done the rough sketch. I made a decision that I wanted some light, so I pulled a little bit of sky down that's gonna, so that back tree or bush line is not gonna be so dense. It's gonna be heavy, and then there's gonna be some sparkle of light through it. That tends to be sort of the kind of sketch I do, and here you'd see it on a brilliant orange, because this is gonna be so blue greens that I thought, well, I'll go with that punchy contrast. Here's a piece of that canvas paper. So I'm going to do a second, and that way I'm going to work two simultaneously. So I'm going to work a quick sketch, and that's going to be what I'm going to do in this first video. So I'm looking at this. Ideally, I've been here, so I'm familiar with this place. You would want to work some loose pencil sketches or charcoal sketches. I'm going to now go right into laying in my sketch. So a lot of times I'll just use a flat or a small brush. I'm going to dip into my ink. I'm going to take some glazing liquid for that initial sketch. I tend to use the gloss medium in with my paint because I know I'm just going to get a base color down. I'm going to pull some of the brown. So I had black and brown, and this, you can decide. If you're working with if you've put your sketch in pencil, you'd still be coming up with, I tend to like the ink, the brown, and I'm going to use what you have, some of that cyan, the primary blue. And I'm looking, and that's a little too blue for what I want. So I'm just going to lift a bit more brown into it, a little bit more ink. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do, what I almost always tend to do, the ratio is the same. I'm going to tend to identify where that horizon line is, and then I'm going to just start to think, okay, what is this? There's a stream, and that stream is going out of our view back there. So I'm just trying to first set in where are the masses, the mass of those things which have volume. The stream is flat, so I see it's back there, and I know it comes out of our view, and I start to see this bank on this side which is high, so it's going to have, it actually will have, and I mean, I'm not going to try to do that right now, but I'll just do this to indicate it has a drop down to where the actual water level is. And then I'm going to look at what that, so I'm just thinking that back tree line. So I'm not trying to draw trees yet. I'm just massing in where I see some of the different elements. Foreground, middle ground, and I'm sort of working towards what would be those background trees that are behind everything. And I know that there's this foundation under the trees back there that's pretty dark, so I'm just setting that in. I'm going to come back into this area that is in the front, still working with this really big brush. I can see a lot of dark, and in fact, I'm going to dip into my ink, get a really, really deep, because I know what is going to be under all of this is a pretty strong dark. And again, I'm not doing this painting. I'm sort of digging the foundation for this painting. I'm going to take my brush into, I have premixed orange, which is the cadmium orange. You could mix, so I just lifted a little bit of orange, only because I want to set in just a basic sense of where that ground is going to be. And now I'm grabbing some of the primary yellow, turning that orange a little bit lighter and just pulling some of that. So once again, I am not fretting about, oh my gosh, I don't think I've shown that one tree that's back there. Instead, I'm just worried right now about, can I get the basic parts in? A little bit more of that yellow, grabbing a tiny bit of white, only because I know there's going to be some strong light that'll be there in that foreground eventually. I'm just using that a little bit. I can see that there's some light that comes through in that middle ground back there. And I'm going to mix in neutral. I'm putting those colors together, lifting a little bit more of that orange. You could mix that really easily. So that color, I'm going to put some more of my brown in. I'm going to just get a neutral to go underneath that shallow, still water that is sort of puddled, and it's really warm. So I'm going to grab some of that Indian yellow, which is an orange yellow, and mix it right in there. And all I'm doing with that, I like that. So I just put some of that through the water. And I'm going to grab another brush. This is where I love these Egberts. And all I'm doing is I'm just scrubbing just to start sort of setting in what I know is going to be where that water is going to go. I see on this one side it is really dark. So I'm going to take some of my orange with that almost pure black, the ink, and just slightly enhance that. This is part of how I can show those. So all I'm doing is setting that in. That's going to help me to eventually establish that this bank is up high. That's that shadow you're seeing. And that's sort of where that height is. And I can do that if I want, just to remind myself. And then I see there's a shadow as that water meets some of this bank. And if you don't have the cadmium orange, I'll do it right now. I could come over here and just mix. So I've just taken, well, my dipping in, and for reasons I can't figure out, the primary magenta started to dry much faster than any other color on my palette. So I made a little bit of an orange there. I'm just going to come in and just slightly enhance some of that color I see in the water. And then before I would say that I'm going to give this a pause to dry a little bit, I'm going to lift a nice big dollop of titanium white, the transparent white. I'm going to look at that sky. This sky happens to lean purple. So I use some of the primary. So I just dip some of that primary cyan into my white. But I also have ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue leans a bit more purple. That was an optional color, just like smalt blue is an optional color. I could put some of the primary cyan in some of the smalt, or I could put some of the primary cyan in the ultramarine. And I want it even more saturated, because I'm looking and that sky has some really nice stuff happening in it. And all I'm going to do is just pull so that I can start to suggest that sky that's going to end up behind a lot of what I do in these trees. And this is a sort of stormy sky, not stormy, it's a breezy looking sky. So I did that. Now I'm going to take my brush and just pure white. Oh, my color's getting really dirty because I haven't been very good about not slamming my brush in there. So all I'm going to do with that white is, for now, and I'm going to show you, and I can cheat, I keep a lot of the colors in liquid. So this happens to be titanium white in the liquid version. So I can just add some of that right now rather than jumping up and looking for my tube. So all I'm going to do is just roughly suggest that there's going to be some movement. That sky is not a solid, calm blue sky, but instead there's going to be a lot of movement in it. So this is on a pale yellow ground. Remember from the very first class, this would not be probably my choice. I'm finding that ground to be a little anemic under what I'm doing, but that's fine. I can work with whatever I have. Okay, so I could just let this be. There's that one that's brighter. I'll probably have to do another coat. One of the disadvantages of the liquid is it isn't as opaque, and I have a lot of medium on my palette and in my brush, so it's thinning it. So now I would have that just sit. I'd give this a chance to dry. So if you imagine that's going to dry, I can bring this one back up. If I was going to go into this now and just do a sort of second go at it, I'm just going to do this for a brief while and then I'm going to sort of pause. So I'm reaching over and I'm taking a big brush of the primary cyan and I'm mixing it right into that dark neutral I used to do the sketch on my previous. Now I'm going to lift some of the primary yellow into it, and I'm still finding this a little artificial looking, so I'm going to dip into the ink. I just have a really strong inky sort of blue-black, and all I'm going to do is just draw a little bit into that background, because I know there's going to be a lot of objects in the middle and foreground that are going to contrast with that strong shadow that's back there in the tree line. So all I'm doing is just letting some of that come through. I see the tree line has some variety. So there's some strong shadows up here. Try not to paint on my other painting I have leaning there. I'm going to lift. There was an optional color called Dairy Lied Yellow. All that it would be is the yellow, the primary yellow, with a tiny bit of, a very small bit of the red in it to warm it up. So I'm putting that into that deep black green that I just mixed. So now I've got a slightly lighter variety of green, and all I'm going to do with that is just begin to drag through there to suggest that this is going to be a variety of foliage back there, and a lot of it is in pretty strong shadow. Remember, I made a choice to sort of introduce that little bit of sky that's going to come through. So as I move through that, I'm going to create an edge where I'd see through some of this foliage that I'm making up. Okay, so now I've just got that little bit of a variety in the tree line. I'm going to look, and there's a middle zone here before that huge iris that's in the foreground. So I'm going to take that same color I have, and I'm going to take a full brush load of that primary yellow. And all I'm going to do for now is start to just establish for myself where, so I'm just loosely using that sketch that I had in place to establish that there's a lot of warmer greens, and there's going to be a variety of plants. There's flowering, and I should know these names, but I'm forgetting. The wonderful, the flowers that are shooting up, and I see some textural grasses. So for now, I'm just establishing what will be that kind of range. And if you wanted, I could also take a smaller brush. I'm going in the medium. Lift up some of this back into that primary yellow and just make it. So if I wanted, I can even start to very loosely, and notice I'm not trying to draw plants. I'm just starting to suggest that there's going to be a lot of texture. So all I'm doing for the time being is beginning to establish how this whole, what the sort of hierarchy of the plants and the values themselves, with that strong dark anchoring the back, this middle ground that's going to have a whole range of different kinds of blues. Different greens. And then as we move forward, I'm going to take any of that primary yellow that I've left, and I'm just letting it, that color, as I'm mixing it, I'm picking up some of that sky down there. And all I'm going to do with this is just for now, I don't want to try to finish the painting. I'm just, once again, establishing where the parts are. So notice I'm loading the brush by dragging it through. And for now, all I'm doing is trying to capture some of that gesture, some of that nice, fresh gesture of this mass of beautiful gray, blue, green. I just did dip into my water. I've got a lot of medium in the paint, and it's starting to just dry out a little bit because there's probably some of that acrylic gloss medium in there, which, remember, dries faster. So I just lifted some of what's on my palette, which is the glazing liquid that slows it down. I'm using this brush, and I'm loading it constantly into a sort of a nice, much more controllable tip, but I'm not trying to render this. I want to just get that basic sense, and that plant is made up of all these beautiful leaves. It looks like there's at least, I guess there's there's probably 4 or 5 tubers in there. I mean, where the roots are going, but it is all sort of leaning down into that one primary area. So all I'm doing is, for now, just trying to establish what that is, and then it gets very, very blue. Now I just realized I should have used the primary, but I reached over and grabbed some, so I went for the, well, here, I'll just alter it. I'm going to grab that primary blue, and the primary blue is going to make it primary cyan. You can see how that just became really yellow, or really bluish. And I'm going to take a little bit of that white that I still have in my palette. So I've changed that color because when I look down here, the light, the way it's hitting that is already changing the colors. So I figured even in this sketch, I might as well start to establish that that's happening. So all I'm doing is just getting this basic sense of what the flow. And you've probably heard the term gesture in other art classes, and that is something where you're really just trying to see, can I get the direction of the energy, the movement that is implied? Because if we're looking at a static image, even if it's an organic shape, the best we can do is imply that kind of movement. So I'm just sort of, at this point, I'm going to let that be. And I still have that really strong dark, I think, left. And I'm just dirty and filthy at brushes, so I'll grab another brush. I'm going to take that deep black green that I have a little bit left on that edge of the colors I've mixed. Dip into my ink. Dip into my ink again. So I want to go back to that really strong dark. I'm just going to bring some of those darks in here, because there's actually going to be, and I sort of loosely sketched it in, there is a planter that shows up in there. But what I really want to do for now is just help to establish what are the parts. Now normally I would never paint on a panel, a canvas board, but we're practicing, so that's why I'm sort of going, oh my gosh, what do I do with these edges? So I'm painting those edges out. If I'm working on a canvas, stretched canvas, I don't worry about that. I don't paint the edges. I do those, generally I just go through them in a matte black. Some people use a black gesso. I just use a mixed acrylic, and I make, so I see there's some dirt down there, so all I'm going to do is lay in a little bit of a brown for that, and I see that taking a little bit more of my red. Yellow ochre is one of the optional colors you have, but that is comparable to, gosh, I just went blank, the transparent yellow with a little bit of white in it. So I'm just trying to mix that, something to hint at this pot. All I'm going to do is just work a little bit of that in here for now. So if you note, I've not tried I'm not worrying if this, at this point, I don't have a lot of detail, but I've just established. So I have two paintings that are roughed in, masked in, underpainting, a variety of different terms that overlap on the kind of thing. So these are both now ready. I would let them dry. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to let them dry. And then I'm going to put a coat of the gloss medium and varnish over them. And that is where we'll pick up on the next video. Have fun.